Hi, this video will talk about multiplication of real numbers. Again, when we talk about real numbers, we're talking about numbers that can take on any value in both positive and negative numbers. Rule number one is if we have a positive times a positive, it yields a positive. The answer will be positive. A negative times a negative, the answer will be positive as well. If we have a positive times a negative, the answer is negative. And if we have a negative times a positive, the answer is negative. So here I have some examples. Here we've got positive 3 times 5. That is going to equal a positive 15. Okay, positive times a positive yields a positive. Here we have negative 2 times negative 3. That is going to yield a positive 6. Why? Rule number 2 tells us a negative times a negative yields a positive. Here we have negative 2 times 4. Well, first of all, we're going to say 2 times 4 is 8, and then we're going to look at the sign. I see that I have a negative times a positive, so my answer is going to be negative. In other words, if one of my signs is negative and I only have two things I'm multiplying, then my answer is going to be negative. Here I have 7 times a negative 2. Again, 7 times 2 is 14, but I've got a positive times a negative, which is going to yield a negative. Finally, I want to discuss a little bit about multiplying fractions. When we add and subtract fractions, we have to find a common denominator, but that is not the case when we multiply fractions. When we multiply fractions, such as in this case, we just simply multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators. So in this case, we'd have 1 times 1 and 3 times 2. Okay? So we have a negative times a positive. We know our answer is going to be negative based on this rule here. A negative times a positive yields a negative. And now based on fractions, I say 1 times 1 yields 1. And 3 times 2 yields 6. So my answer is negative 1/6. Down here, we're going to do the same thing. I can see I've got a negative times a negative. I know my answer is going to be positive. And now to get my fraction, I say 2 times 3 is 6 is in my numerator. And my denominator is 5 times 7, which is 35. So that is how we multiply real numbers. And as one final note, if you have a string of things to multiply, then just go in order. The same rules will apply. Okay? So in other words, I have negative 2 times 3. That would yield a negative 6. And then I have a negative 6 times a negative 3. That is going to yield a positive 18. So my answer is a positive 18. As a double check, I can count the number of signs. Here I have 1, 2. If I have an even number of negative signs, then my answer is going to be positive. If I have an odd number of negative signs, then my answer is going to be negative. Let's try one of those. Suppose I have minus 3 times a minus 2 times a minus 4. Okay, in this example, minus 3 times minus 2 yields a positive 6. A positive 6 times a negative 4 is going to yield a negative 24. So that is my answer. Once again, if I count out my number of negative signs, I've got 1, 2, 3. It's an odd number, so I know my answer is going to have to be negative. An odd number of negative signs, the answer is negative. An even number of negative signs, the answer is positive.